Slavery is first recorded on campus at the Single Sisters house. In 1786, the Single Sisters moved into their newly constructed home on Salem Square. Enslaved people worked at the Single Sisters house as early as 1788. An enslaved boy swept the chimney because he was the only person small enough to fit inside. In 1810, the Single Sisters rented an enslaved man named Sam to serve in their household and management. In 1817, Sam married Betsy, an enslaved woman serving at the boarding school, now known as South Hall, next door, and the Single Sisters hired at least 2 other enslaved men whose names are unknown to replace Sam. During the 1820s and the 1830s, the sisters continued to utilize enslaved labor in their household operations. Upon his death in 1824, a man named Lewis was the property of the Single Sisters at Salem. Free African Americans, including Christian Samuel, Miles Phillips, and Kelby, also worked for the Single Sisters. In June 1793, at the age of 11, Anna Maria Samuel, an enslaved girl from Bethabara, entered the older girls' choir in Salem and moved into the Single Sisters house. As a member of the choir, she joined with the other Single Sisters in rituals and activities such as love feasts, choir meetings, classes, and chores. In 1795, Anna Maria returned to Bethabara. She and her family were freed by the Bethabara congregation in 1797. She died of a fever on February 13, 1798, and is buried in Bethabara's God's Acre. From 1823 until 1870, Salem Female Academy educated 13 Cherokee students, most of whom came from the Moravian missions in Georgia. In 1823, Sisters Martha and Mary McNair were the first Cherokee students known to have enrolled in the school. Jane Ross, the daughter of John Ross, principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, was also a student at Salem beginning in 1835. She left the school to join her family on the Trail of Tears in 1838.
This new historic marker explains the role of enslaved laborers at the original boarding school building. The completion of South Residence Hall in 1805 marked Salem's shift from a day school to a boarding school. The original building contained classrooms, a dining hall, and lodging space for pupils and teachers in the early 19th century. Enslaved individuals may have lived in the school itself or in the 1817 wash house, now the Alumni House, behind South Hall. Katie, who was owned by the Moravian Church, and a man named Nat are both known to have worked at the school while they were enslaved in Salem. Ledgers from Salem Academy and College indicate that enslaved labor was used in the laundry from 1810 until at least 1840. Other records indicate that the school continued to rent enslaved individuals for various tasks through the end of the Civil War in 1865. Betsy is the first known enslaved laborer at the girls' boarding school. Inspector Abraham Steiner purchased Betsy for $400 in 1810. She was the daughter of Phoebe and Bodney, 2 of the first communicant members of St. Phillips, the African Moravian congregation in Salem. Betsy worked in the laundry for the girls' boarding school from 1810 to 1817, when she married Sam, an enslaved man working next door at the Single Sisters house. She may have lived in the inspector's house, or in the boarding school building, or its surrounding outbuildings. Betsy and Sam were owned by various individuals throughout their lifetime, and they had 8 children, 3 of whom died in infancy and are buried at St. Philip's Church. The exact date of Betsy's death is unknown, but she lived until at least 1873. The new historic marker at the inspector's house shows that Salem's early inspectors purchased enslaved people to help with their household management and with the daily operations of the boarding school. The historic marker reads, "The inspector's house was built in 1810 as a permanent residence or office for the head of the boarding school, later known as Salem Academy and College. On October 3, 1810, Inspector Abraham Steiner purchased an enslaved girl named Betsy to work in the laundry at the boarding school. It's possible that other enslaved people also lived in the inspector's house throughout the remainder of the antebellum period to assist with both household and institutional labor. The inspectors who purchased or rented free or enslaved people include Abraham Steiner, who was inspector from 1806 to 1816, Benjamin Reichel, who was inspector from 1816 to 1834. Reichel had rented an enslaved woman on 3 separate occasions during his tenure as inspector. Whether they were actively working in the school or within the inspector's house, where boarding students were also living, these enslaved women helped support the school's operations and growth. Finally, John C. Jacobson, who was inspector until 1835, also rented a free man named Kelby to help with the daily operations of the school. Any of these enslaved or free African Americans could have lived in the inspector's house during this time period. Salem Academy and College transitioned from slavery to a segregated workforce at the end of the Civil War in 1865. The school had remained open during the Civil War with great difficulty. Many daughters of senators and representatives in the Confederate Congress were sent to the school during the conflict because, quote, it was thought that no place of refuge could be furnished as safe as Salem, unquote. After the Civil War, labor remained largely segregated at the school. Black employees worked as kitchen staff, gardeners, laundresses, maintenance workers, janitors, and various other positions on campus. The names of many Black employees during this time period are unknown. Occasionally, they were mentioned in school publications. The Alumni Newsletter, which was a monthly newsletter where students wrote updates about the goings-on at Salem for alumni, included the names of a few employees. The work that these individuals were doing was difficult and often dangerous. In 1893, the newsletter detailed the death of Matt Walker, a Black man who worked at the school for 13 years and was in direct care of many of the large buildings. He was killed while operating a new horse-powered circular saw that had recently been installed in the woodshed. The students remarked that all of the pupils knew Matt and the wants which he filled would number tens of thousands. In recounting his tragic death at the hands of the new machinery, students mentioned that 4 or 5 other men were around but also were not harmed. This accident happened on the modern-day site of the Lily Pond. Black laborers were both numerous and essential to the operations and maintenance of the college after the Civil War.
The Lost Cause ideology shaped the Salem Female Academy and its prominent donors during the Jim Crow era. Race relations in the towns of Winston and Salem were entering a period of tension due to continued segregation and discrimination against members of the Black community. Zebulon B. Vance, governor of North Carolina during the Civil War and the U.S. Senator during Reconstruction, helped Salem keep the doors open during the war by securing supplies and food for the institution. Principal Robert Deschwanitz described Vance as a close personal friend of the school due to his assistance in securing supplies and food during the Civil War. Vance owned enslaved people until at least 1860, but after his death, students memorialized Vance by fundraising for a stained glass window in his honor. This was in 1894 as Lost Cause sentiments began sweeping the South. After the success of the Vance Memorial Window fundraising campaign, students considered the possibility of creating a stained glass window dedicated to Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. Students and alumni had a special interest in Jackson due to the fact that his widow, Mary Ann Morrison Jackson, attended the Academy from 1847 to 1849 and was one of its most famous graduates. She returned in 1914 to receive an honorary degree from Salem College. Students expressed the consideration they felt for her late distinguished husband. However, a memorial to Stonewall Jackson was never completed. The James B. Gordon chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy was established around this time in 1898 with 24 members. Louisa Wilson Bidding helped establish the chapter in Forsyth County. In 1858, Louisa Wilson Bidding, a Salem College alumna, married Joseph Bidding. In 1860, Joseph Bidding enslaved 75 people on his tobacco plantation near the Yadkin River. In 1905, the United Daughters of the Confederacy erected a monument on the corner of 4th and Liberty Streets in Winston honoring the heroes who served in the Great Conflict. The statue was taken down in 2019. In 1930, Katie Bidding Reynolds funded the construction of a dormitory on the campus of Salem College and named it after her mother, Louisa Wilson Bidding. The United Daughters of the Confederacy unveiled another Confederate monument at UNC Chapel Hill in 1913. White supremacist Julius Carr gave the dedication speech. A group of women representing Salem attended the dedication of Silent Sam, including 3 alumni faculty members and 4 students.
This historic marker text reads, "Tenement housing for African Americans bordered Salem Academy and College in the area where the Babcock and Bahnson residence halls now stand. City directories from the 1890s show that many of the residents of these houses worked in tobacco factories in laundries as plasterers, domestics, cooks, barbers, farmers, drivers, laborers, and included the principal of a grade school. By 1970, this street and the African American housing had disappeared, and a new college heating plant was constructed in the vicinity. Residents of the Happy Hill crossed Salem Creek to get to their jobs at Salem Academy and College. Crossing the creek was difficult and unsafe. In 1936, Happy Hill resident Wade Bidding Sr. advocated for the construction of a bridge to make the journey easier for residents, including his wife, Josephine, who worked in the laundry. In 2021, the Winston-Salem City Council voted to rename the bridge in Mr. Bidding's honor. Black employees worked in the kitchen, dining hall, grounds, and laundry. Old Salem researcher Mel White interviewed former Happy Hill resident Mr. Paul Bidding for the 1998 Across the Creek Museum exhibit. White wrote, "Even some of the employees' children found jobs." Paul Bidding remembers that the girls hired him and his friends to pick daisies so that the girls could have daisy chains for graduation. They got the job through Bidding's mother, who worked in the laundry. Bahnsen's infirmary was built on the site where the African American tenement housing once stood. Erected in 1925, the Bahnson Infirmary was named in honor of Dr. Henry T. Bahnson, a Confederate soldier who was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg and held prisoner in Baltimore for 6 months before returning home to Salem. Bahnson served as the college physician for several years. The building is still in operation as the Bahnson Residence Hall for upperclassmen at Salem College.
We are at St. Phillips Moravian Church. This African and African American Moravian congregation was organized in Salem in 1822 among a mostly enslaved population. It is one of the oldest Black congregations in the United States. It is the only historic Moravian African American congregation in the country. Consecrated December 15, 1861, St. Phillips Moravian is the oldest African American church standing in North Carolina. The congregation moved around the city of Winston-Salem in the last century, but returned to the brick church full-time in 2019. On Sunday, May 21, 1865, Reverend Seth G. Clark, 10th Regiment, Ohio Cavalry, read General Orders 32, which announced freedom. This was read from the pulpit of St. Philip's Moravian Church, and this is where enslaved congregants first learned of their freedom. St. Philip's is also the final resting place of several people connected to Salem Academy and College's history. Lewis, who was enslaved by the Single Sisters when he died in 1824, is buried here. Christian Samuel, brother to Anna Maria Samuel, a free man who worked for the Single Sisters and enjoyed playing music, is also buried here. His story is one of the many featured in St. Philip's log church exhibits at Old Salem Museum and Gardens. And while Betsy and Sam, who were two of the first enslaved laborers at the boarding school and the Single Sisters house, are both buried in St. Philip's Moravian 2nd Graveyard on the corner of Cemetery Street and Salem Avenue. Their two lost infant sons and an infant daughter are also buried here at St. Philip's Moravian Church. St. Philip's Moravian Church is a place that represents faith and freedom to so many. For this reason, we choose St. Philip's as the site of our commemoration of Salem's enslaved laborers. Telling Salem's history is not complete without acknowledging that the school would not exist as it is without the skills, knowledge, and labor of enslaved individuals before the Civil War and its Black employees after the war through to the present day. To learn more and to see a full version of the Anna Maria Samuel Project's timeline of Salem Academy and College history, please visit salemacademyandcollege.org. www.census.org/AMS.